Poinsettia, Chapter 26. The front door trembled loudly with knocking. It alerted Laura, who was sitting in the den before the fireplace, crocheting calmly. At her feet, Angus was watching intently. At least he was watching intently, until the horrid banging came to the doors. He looked up at the clock on the mantel, as if he needed to confirm the time. The grandfather clock in the corner. It was a little early, but Gavin would be waking up very soon. Any moment, in fact. Still, it would not do for him to wake up angry about the door's noises. Angus therefore got up and headed for the front door. Laura set down her yarn and crocheting needle and followed him curiously. She had grown rather close to Angus and his personable personality. He was neither too childish nor intimidating. He was a nice blend of both, and made a good friend. Laura came up beside Angus, but at a little distance to respect him and the visitor. At the door, once it was opened, stood Sister Bernadette. "Sister? What a pleasant surprise!" Angus greeted. He then noticed such a distressed expression on her face. "What's wrong?" "One of the children is missing." "What?" "Sister, calm down. Come inside," Laura offered. "Tell us what happened." In she came, but she was almost hyperventilating from her frantic movements. She took a few moments to gather herself, shaking her hands as if it would release some of her tension. "I didn't think anything of it at first. She's a very bold and adventurous and energetic child. They were all playing all over the place today. I believe little Danny went outside to play in the snow. She didn't come in for lunch, but we thought perhaps she was just playing really hard and lost track of time. We began to look for her and looked high and low, but not a trace to be found. We came to the conclusion she just wasn't on the property anymore, and then we panicked. It meant that she either wandered off or she was taken. We were hoping perhaps she wandered into town to see you and Lord McIntyre, as she seemed rather taken with you two." "What about the police?" Laura asked. I wanted to be sure, and oh, what am I going to do? I could never forgive myself if... Angus narrowed his eyes, feeling something amiss in all of this. He reached out and grabbed her arms. "Sister, calm yourself. If you think like that, there'll be nothing we can do. Have faith in that God of yours. You'll find her." "Find who?" Gavin yawned as he came down the stairs. "What is all the commotion about down here?" "The wee lass Danny has gone a-missing, your lordship." "What now?" he gasped, suddenly completely awake. "Have the police been summoned?" "She wanted to try and look herself before involving the authorities, Gavin," Laura explained, trying to calm the crying nun. Gavin frowned. "Very well. Sister, you stay here. Angus and I will look for Danny. Laura, look after her. Try to calm her down." "Of course," Laura replied with a nod. She approached the poor old nun with sympathy, as Angus cast a wink in his master's direction. "Aye, your lordship. The nae ye lass's fret o'hair. We'll get her back before you know it." "But," Sister Bernadette began, in worry and protest. Gavin and Angus simply whisked by her and marched with great determination out the front door and into the streets. Laura took the nun's hand and gave her a gentle tug in hopes of leading her towards the den. "Come now, sister, don't argue with them. Let's have some tea and wait patiently here. I'm sure she's fine. If she's in Strathaven, I assure you that his lordship and Angus will find her and bring her back." "But what if—" she began. "No!" Laura scolded, holding up a finger as if to shake it in the nun's face. "No, sister. You mustn't think like that. Not ever. You have to have faith that heaven is looking out for her. You can't falter now. She needs our prayers. Let us go into the den, and let us pray for her there and the success of those men in her favor." Sister Bernadette sucked in her wrinkly bottom lip and nibbled nervously on it. She wasn't completely swayed. She worried for the children in her care, and Danny was certainly a handful. Still, Laura had a point. There was nothing that she could do besides pray. She was then resigned to retire into the den and do just that. Gavin marched along the crunchy and slushy street. He had determination and a hint of anger in his step. It came abruptly to a halt once he had reached a corner a few blocks away from his mansion. His senses were finally attuned and alert, and he stood still and silent in hopes of picking up some sign. Perhaps, though, they were too keen and overlooked something more obvious, something plainly in front of his face or under his nose. He turned on his heels abruptly, only to come nose to nose, in a figurative sense, with Angus, colliding a bit with the smaller body. "Yah! Would you watch it, you miserable cur?" "Master, get a hold of yourself! No need to be cross with me," he said. He had been taken rather by surprise by Gavin's abruptness as well. His expression softened right after. "I'm worried about her too. If it makes any difference, though, I think I may know what happened to her." "You think?" Gavin hissed. "Do we have time for a hunch?" "It's certainly a lot better than wandering around without a clue, dinna you think?" he suggested. "Then be out with it," Gavin roared. "She has done something like this before. She has overheard the board plotting to plunder the boarder's house," he explained. "Perhaps she has heard something like it again. I was there to catch her the last time. There is no one there now. She's stubborn and crafty. She will want to come and tell us." "She is a foolish child," Gavin spat, more out of worry and frustration than anything. "She could get hurt out here. If she even remembered how to get to the mansion, would she not have been intercepted by Sister Bernadette on her trek there?" "If you think she might have been caught, that could certainly mean a worse fate than simply being lost in the streets." Angus nodded in agreement. He brought his fingers to his mouth as he turned to face the mansion's direction. He blew a strong whistle, and it echoed loudly into the cold winter evening. It wasn't long before it was met with a response, a howl that brought along with it a chorus of barks. It was the pack of hounds, and they came at the call of their masters. Even as the pack approached, they seemed to somehow already know their purpose and their mission. They didn't even stop to gather their orders, but rushed past the vampire and werewolf as if they were not even present. Onward they went on the search, focused and unbreakable. The scent of the child needed to be found, and no distractions would be tolerated. And sure enough, within several minutes, a howl came from the distance and signaled for the masters to come and see. Gavin and Angus were quick to respond, and were swiftly at the side of the successful beast. It had panted happily, knowing it had done its job well. He pawed at the soggy thing on the ground, as if to urge the masters to hurry and pick it up. They knew immediately what this sop of wet fur was. It was Danny's teddy bear, dressed in warm winter clothing. However, now it was wet and dirty from the snow, and streaked and near missed tramples. Gavin crouched down and retrieved it, bringing it up in his hand. "It's Bumblebee," he frowned, his worry growing once more. "I have never seen her without him." Angus said nothing. He was frantic on the inside, but for his master's sake, and perhaps even for his own, and Danny's sake, he remained as composed as he could possibly manage. Still, he felt the burning anger inside of him. He was swift to look around. He listened. He looked. He smelled. And he had become certain no one was around to lay eyes on them. He hurried to fiddle with his clothes and tossed them free of his body until he stood nude and a little pale from the cold beside his master in the street. He transformed then into his wolfen form and let out an angry and determined howl. This sent the pack into another frenzy of barks and howls. He dropped down, bringing his face closer to the bear in Gavin's hand. He took in the scent deeply. "Aye," he snarled. "That is indeed Bumblebee." "How long ago was he dropped, Angus?" Gavin asked. Angus's nostrils flared, and he began to sniff about the street. "It has been a few hours. The scent is fading. Maybe this afternoon." He gasped, his fur, his tail, and his ears shooting erect in his shock. His inhale was so abrupt that he let out a hard sneeze that nearly toppled him forward. He then snarled. He curled back his lips and bared his teeth as he displayed as much aggression in his body language as possible. Every shaft of fur stood on end. His mantle and tail bushed out beyond their normal perceived size, his ears pressed so tightly against his head. Yet Gavin watched him with a hint of knowledge. He knew this body language, yet he still eyed his assistant curiously for some confirmation about his findings. "What is it?" "It is Lord McCarran and Mr. McLaughlin, your lordship," he snarled. "They had taken Danny." "What?" "No," he pleaded breathily. He looked sorrowfully at Bumblebee in his hand. He brought the soggy bear close to him, cradling it longingly. There were so many emotions wanting to explode from within him in that moment. He had to keep them under control. He had to fight them and find the ones that would prove the most useful. He had to focus harder for her sake. He took a deep breath, covering his face with a facade of expressionless calm. "Can you follow the scent, Angus?" "Aye," he replied. He took a good whiff to be sure he had it in his mind. He memorized it, every last scent particle he could find in that place, and off he went. Off he darted in the direction that the scent led him, the dogs coming together to keep the scent well tracked. They were eager for their prize. No fox would they find for their masters in this hunt, but weasels, dirty scoundrels, and this pleased them just as much. In the end, perhaps it was better, for they'd be allowed to taste and chew if the masters rewarded them. Gavin followed the pack on foot until he reached the entrance of the park, his regular route. The dogs were scattered about like the pigeons had been. Not breadcrumbs, but scent crumbs were their gain. Angus stood above the pack as Gavin approached. "Master, they are up that way," he said as he pointed further down the regular route. "The wind has shifted, and I can smell them clearly now. Their scents are coming from the cemetery," Gavin finished dryly, with a glare of bitterness. "Keep going this way, Angus. I'm going to go on ahead of you. Follow the scent, and I shall search for her from the air." As he finished his words, he was already vanishing into a collection of chattering bats from his feet upwards into a wave. Again, this unnatural colony had taken flight, not the least bit affected by the bitter cold of Scotland's unforgiving winter. As they rose, Angus returned to the dogs and the route on which the scent trail had led them.